Hello, Operation Mechstorm here. I am playing in a Days of Ruin tournament over on Tiny Wars. I just had an interesting game versus my opponent, maybe Q here. It wrapped up recently and I figured I would record kind of my thoughts while they're still fresh. So I want to jump straight into the game, not to front load things, and I'll just explain my thought process as we go. That'll give you more insight about how I feel about the map and the COs. So you buy 2 infantry here. In Days of Ruin you can buy bikes, so you always must consider them. But that's to cap this base over here, which is no faster with a bike, and to load into this lander, which you have to move to be able to drop onto this island here. It's actually debatable whether or not you go for the island first or you go for this little 3 chain here. That's a pretty lucrative chain, and you start the cap a day quicker because you don't have to waste a day loading and dropping. The reason I went for the island, which we'll see if I just kind of fast forward here, mostly I mapped it out, I think, and it was within 1k of total funds between the two, and I didn't want to give my opponent the extra 1k that not flipping the cap for a day would do. I was worried about squeezing out an extra tank or something like that. I didn't want a map interaction like that to go negatively for me just because of inexperience. So I decided to go for kind of the safe option here. So my opponent actually does the same thing. And now for capture grouting on this other base. So obviously you get this base here first, and then you have kind of an option. Do you want to put an infantry here and do this kind of slingshot route? So you go back here, you cap, and then in 2 more days you get to this port. That feels like the most efficient way to deal with this airport and port, because otherwise you are going to be doing some wasted movement. If you had a fresh infantry on a base, he has to spend 2 days still to get to this port. It feels a little slow compared to sending this guy back, and he's still in range of a 2-day cap. So that was one option. The other option is to buy a bike from this base, and then you can do this route. So you go down here, cap this, and then in another day you cap this, and then in another day you have your pick between these two. This is a pretty good chain. The only reason to delay it, and one reason I decided to delay it, these 2 caps are not very contested, and the mirror for the opponent. The reason for that is, if we think about the front dynamics on this map, this side has 2 bases and an airport, and it is incredibly strong in that sense versus a single base side, perhaps supported by this airport. So you can really be a bully on this side, you'd imagine. You have a lot of pressure into this side right next to these caps, so they're not very weak. It's not really important to speed them up. Same for the opponent over here. What you want to be quick on are these weak side caps. So think about all these for my opponent, all these for me. How many of these are you going to get? How early? And when I was making my opener for this map, I didn't really consider how weak these 2 properties are for either player. But after playing the map again, it's been a long time, these are definitely the most contested. Maybe with the second most contested being one of these 2, probably this one. They are not nearly as contested though as these 2. These are where all the fighting is going to happen. And the reason for that is this is their strong side, and they definitely want to act like a bully on their strong side, make use of proximity to their airport and an overwhelming number of units to make something happen, and maybe even flip properties over here. So just keep that in mind. As far as how that influences this early capture phase, not too much. Like I said, you don't really have to consider doing this fast, so failing that, I decided to do this first, just because it might create a little more forward pressure on these contesteds because this infantry will be 1 day faster to getting over here and doing stuff. I don't know how big of a role it plays to do that 1 day faster, but we'll see how that develops. So my opponent is first for the bike here, just because I think he's ahead on this base, is how it works out. Doing some very normal capture routing. And I do drop this infantry here. Now the reason for dropping him here, I was considering several tiles. There is only one trade-off being made here. The only property that I could have captured in 2 days if I had dropped anywhere else, but cannot, is this one. Because I can't drop any closer to these two, which would be nice if I could. Those two are great to secure early, but it doesn't work out in the cap phase. So I don't think it's super important to start this one very early. I could definitely be wrong about that because it lets you chain to this guy, which is very contested. But at the time I was kind of having these dreams of, oh, maybe if he messes up, I might be able to capture this one, which is super far forward on their 2 base side. Generally not a great idea. That is really unlikely, but I wanted to create the threat of it. And if he did something weird, didn't respond right, I could still have my pick of capturing either of these two on the subsequent turn. So I wasn't really losing much by creating that threat. And that's one thing to look out for when you're not sure exactly where to move. Just keep your options as open as possible, right? I have the option of 3 caps here. I only lost 1 option by moving like this. And I can choose after seeing my opponent's turn how I want to move. So I'm leaving my options maximally open and making them cover as much as possible. Minor things, but it can add up. So I also buy a recon, and this recon looks really bad on its face. Like, look at this movement. It's terrible on the first day. But one reason for this is my opponent cannot afford a tank on the next day. Just how the funding curve works. And the other reason is it can use this vertical slice of the map, this guy, pretty well. There's a lot of roads there. It can use them pretty efficiently to switch fronts. And an early recon with a tank that's delayed, I think it has a lot of threats on various parts of the map. So I think it can force concessions here possibly, and possibly here, and it might even help me down here eventually. So a single unit doing all that and kind of getting out ahead of all the tank spam, I felt like it was worth it. The thing to look for, the thing I was looking for, is really the routing for the recon. So if it didn't have as many roads to front shift and it just kind of ended up dying somewhere, like just getting stuck surrounded by planes somewhere, I probably wouldn't have opted for it. But because it has a lot of flexibility, and because the cap phase kind of, they scatter to the 4 winds with bikes, it felt like it was doable to maybe get an interrupt or at least force some concessions. So that's kind of the idea behind the recon. He moves this bike a little strangely. It could have moved 1 square to the left. The only reason to move it back here like this is maybe you want to wrap around here, but even then you're only getting to this one. And I don't really think it's important to prioritize that cap. He could have moved it here, and then it would have been here. And it's not really that much different. I think in the game he will move it left anyway. But I think it'll end up capturing this property either way. And one thing to consider is that is no faster than an infantry. If he had bought just an infantry instead of the bike, it's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days for that cap. So it's questionable whether you really need a bike, because that bike's still going to take 3 days, even if you moved it with no lost movement. That's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The infantry could have done the job the same way, and he would have saved 1k doing it, because bikes are more expensive, obviously. The advantage of the bike, though, after it finishes all that capturing, it does have more movement, which creates threats on at least 1 extra property. The infantry could already threaten this one. That will actually come up in this game. and it's something I hadn't really considered. I was scratching my head like, this bike seems bad. I still think it's kind of dubious, but it does have extra pressure on these two contestants, so that is something to keep in mind. Always a hidden reason for a more expensive buy if you dig in. So he cannot afford a tank, he just buys some more infantry. Recon wastes its turn moving only 4 tiles, poor Recon. So I actually opt to start this chain. I did some looking ahead, and even with this kind of slow bike routing, it's looking pretty rough because I have to finish this cap and get this unless I want to skip a cap, which is also bad in its own way. These contestants are, I look pretty slow to these, which is just kind of how the map goes, but I was starting to feel it. So I wanted to get guys to this as fast as possible, and it's okay to delay this, especially because that way I'm not eating into this chain for this guy. He can finish it on the next day. So very normal chains here. He opts to send this infantry forward instead of to these back caps. You could accelerate the airport one day with a 2 base infantry if you send it here, but I think just the forward pressure is good, and I think I'd do something similar. Right. Pretty normal cap phase stuff. So I'll explain the recon movement, precisely why I moved where I did in a second. Let's just get through these caps. Okay, so the recon had a couple options of where to move. It could have moved all the way down to the city, I think. Now the reason I moved it exactly here is I knew at this point, since he bought a tank over here, I was probably going to send it south. But while I was in the vicinity, I figured I might as well create some empty threats, things he has to answer just for free, without losing my timing to the south. So I counted the squares, and I found that I can end up here next turn, right? And the turn after, I still have access to interrupt this, and even with a kind of snaky move, interrupt this. And I can even reach this with all 8 tiles of my move there. So I still had access to all of these interrupts, and I was still staying as far north as possible for any interrupts up here. So this is kind of another example of just splitting your options, keeping your options open, keep them guessing, and make them answer as many things as possible. So the things I maintained that he had to answer: recon city sit. So this is a little better than just being able to interrupt the city. I could annoyingly city sit, and maybe if I had a CO tank, which will come up soon, maybe he doesn't want to interrupt it. And also just recon shooting this guy. So obviously his tank movement will probably pretty naturally answer that, but I figured I might as well force him to at least keep a tank in the general vicinity here. So that's the idea with all that. Pretty normal stuff. He actually moves this tank here, which if you look at diagonals, so this is these 2 tiles are the most far forward you can get toward the center, because, you know, if you just extend out this diagonal, this is a little bit more out of the way by 1 tile. So I typically like to move into these 2 tiles, the thick line, when I can. He wanted, I guess, to create a threat on something over here. I'm not entirely sure because these are all very safe. So I don't entirely agree with this tank movement by him. He's kind of losing some movement toward the center. And now let me explain kind of my thoughts about the center on this map. So we already explained that there's a strong base dynamic, right? We have this 2 base side and this weak 1 base side, and vice versa. So the place where that base dynamic really rears its ugly head is the center. So it's only 4 tiles across roughly. You can own the center with only 4 tiles of units because then you have a wall, especially with these mountains. And the thing that you must prevent in this map is your opponent getting control of the center in such a way with their 2 base. I kind of drew that wrong. Their 2 base has more pressure, right? In such a way that they connect to their 1 base. The moment they do that, they have kind of a lane. They have units, the flow of units through the center such that any attack can be defended and they can create attacks by flowing units through. So a lot of maps hinge on the center based on that idea. Now, early on, no one owns the center, right? But vying for the center with early tanks is one of the reasons to buy tanks. The other reason comes more in brawls where they are good at picking off infantry or any unit worth less than like 12,000. But the main early reason is to kind of assert your positional control over the center and kind of try to link up your armies. Because of low unit count early in the game, both armies kind of start with this linkage. No one can own the center if they only have 1 unit sitting there, because that's not enough to form a wall. So we both kind of have this transference through mid early on. This is true in basically every map, right? What you can't allow is them to threaten you out of mid. You know, maybe they'll have powerful units sitting on high defense tiles in the middle, maybe lightly surrounded by infantry or something, and you are stuck somewhere over here looking at them and you're not able to attack them. That is how control is created, right? So it starts with a position you can't attack, and then on the next turn they use their movement to consolidate. So what starts as kind of a scary looking position might become a completely lost position if they're able to create this kind of beak formation where they can form a wall and attack your stuff there, and it's hard for you to ever dislodge them because they have the mountain for defense and things like that. So that anytime you see kind of a choke pointy mid, or really any front, you should keep this in mind, that once the unit count gets higher, it's about vying for that control. It's about making sure you have access to and through the middle, and your opponent does not. And anytime you have the option of where to send a unit and you're not sure, and there's a strong middle, this is why everyone kind of huddles toward the middle and you can get stally maps. Because the moment you concede the middle, you concede position. And we will see in this game actually what happens when middle control gets too good for one side. So anyway, he buys a tank chain. All this was about being 1 tile less efficient toward the middle, by the way. I don't know if it's the end of the world truly, but it's just one thing to keep in mind, and why I kind of maybe scratch my head a little when I see a move like this. It's not game losing, it's not even necessarily a blunder. It just makes me question what the priorities are, because it's not really looking at anything up here. So, alright, more cap phase stuff. So I'm starting this cap, and I CO'd up my tank. So Isabella has a pretty good day-to-day. I would maybe call it similar to Von Bolt's day-to-day. Inside her CO zone, they get a decent attack boost and a small defense boost. And her superpower is, this is a nerfed Isabella, that's why she's got the minus sign. I forget exactly how much better she used to be. I think she used to have more defense. But anyway, she still gets +2 movement to all units, so it's identical to Adder's superpower, and a +1 max attack range on indirects, kind of like Jake. So it's a very good superpower. This is a lot better than a vehicle-only move boost, because the infantry also moving +2 and all the bikes moving +2 means that your Alpha Strike, you get to Alpha Strike their vehicles and Alpha Strike their infantry, wall break their infantry, which lets you hit more vehicles. It's actually, I would say, a big difference between like a Jess superpower, just having that extra infantry move. So I think it's a really good superpower. Definitely an important strategic consideration for this map is making sure I don't have a charge disadvantage. So You get charge in Days of Ruin by making attacks within your CO zone, so this is a very important unit. The reason I boarded my CO now, and you notice he did not, that was to squeeze out an extra tank, but I boarded my CO now because I could still afford a tank, and I wanted to ensure that I was asserting control of the center, right? So I'm going to make a tank chain too, answer his tank chain, and make sure that I have this path to the center, because if I get cut out of the center early, which he had the first tank, right, because I bought this recon, he has the most initiative to cut me out of the center here. If I get cut out early and I, kind of pull back because I'm afraid of getting struck because he has all the high defense tiles in the center and I can't hit him, he can then pivot to my 1 base, or maybe pivot his 2 base units up here and make an attack. He has all the initiative, so I don't want that. That's why I'm kind of contesting with my CO tank. Alright, I'm finally capping this. You can see I kind of checked the timing and there's no way for him to interrupt, so it's fine to be late on this. Whereas these ones, he could even interrupt today. It might actually be decent for him to interrupt today. I was worried about it, but I was like, okay, I've got this recon here, and his tank can't chase the recon very well. Let's see, it can go all the way down to here, and then, yeah, it's out of range of actually interrupting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has to use this tile. It can't go from the right because there's a forest there. So what I could do if he got a nice little interrupt here with his bike, and maybe it's like an 8-5, 8-4, because bikes are very good against infantry, I could pull the infantry off, put him on this tile, then use the recon here. And it's still not great for me. This is my 1 base. It's a decent attack for my opponent, but at least the tank can't reach the recon because I would have a blocker here. So that's kind of what I was thinking with all this formation here. I don't think it's right for me to not cap this. I was considering it because I'm like, geez, him pulling off is pretty bad. But I do think he does lose something from doing all this. He trades his bike into an infantry pretty well because my recon will hit back pretty hard. And he is delaying a cap. So I still think it might be the optimal play for my opponent to go for this interrupt because this is 2 base side. He's going to get the cap anyway. And my 1 base side, it may look like I have a lot right now, but as the game progresses, this will become a pretty sparse front. So that's one thing to keep your eyes out for. If you play into the favor of the map dynamics whenever possible by sacking 2 base stuff at a slightly negative rate into their 1 base stuff, typically it doesn't look good on its front, but as you play out the turns, their 1 base weakness will really start to rear its ugly head. And your 2 base will replenish that missing bike or infantry pretty quickly. So he does not go for the interrupt, which is fine. He COs up a tank, and this is conciliatory. He moves a tank here. He could have been at least here and accomplished everything. So the one thing he's giving up if he goes more south, right, is the ability to wheel himself up and sit on the city in case my CO tank get interrupted. And then that's a full punish because he can wrap his CO tank around like this, and then this guy, even if he's here, he can wrap around and kill off my CO tank. That's the only reason to leave the guy anywhere higher than this tile. So if you want, he could have even moved him down more south. It's out of range of my CO tank because my positioning, he has the initiative, my positioning's a little off. And it threatens more options. So he has the option of pivoting down south. I think it leaves him more open to making choices and even cutting me out of mid. So I think this was a bit of a passive move for my opponent. And passive moves lead to issues down the line if you make too many of them. This, I don't think you end up getting punished for too much, but it's something to keep your eyes out for. There was really no reason that he needed to go any less far than this, and I could even see going further. So one thing he does cover, he still covers everything. This tile's not like a blunder. The thing he covers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The city sit. So you have to watch out for this. this bike on the next turn wants to go capture this city, right? This is a far forward contested. My recon, I think it has enough movement to city sit, yeah. So that would have been, if he missed that, that would have just been a good punish for me. It would have kept him from capping for a turn. So he's still covering everything, but he's maybe chasing the recon a little suboptimally and just not really using his movement and his initiative very well. So anyway, we're staring, we got CO tanks staring at each other, so we'll see what happens there. It's about to get a little feisty, I think. He does still have to make a concession here. That's interesting. Right. He still doesn't cover this tile, which the recon can interrupt from. He could have covered that tile if he decided to go down a little further. So I'm not sure about that move from my opponent. Anyway, since I don't have the city sit and he's not doing the cap, I find another use for my recon, which is a nice little blocker here. Things were about to get bloody if I let him do this. I would get the cap, right, but he would shoot with the bike on the forest, and he's getting good trades with tank backup. So using the recon as kind of a nice little invincible wall is about the best use I can get for it. It's also not a bad tile for access to down here if I want to, you know, annoy him so he's delayed on this property, and he is very delayed. I'm also slow to this property, but he has kind of prioritized going more towards the middle, supporting the idea of interrupting these contesteds here. So I probably should have had more alarm bells in my head at this time, because he does end up interrupting this property, but I didn't really think about it at the time. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Where your opponent's moving units is probably a good indicator of where they want to make things happen. Anyway, so I cap here. And I'm not completely blind to it. I want to have some infantry in range of this to ensure I can punish him if he does interrupt. So that's the idea with that positioning. Also, it's kind of foolhardy to capture this property down here. This is, again, on his 2-base side. This is a property very much owned by him. So I think it's silly for the 1-base to push past that line. So I'm kind of just content with where I'm at here. And one bit of advice for playing a 1-base in general, you don't want to get too adventurous with your captures. You can see I even bought an artillery here. This all supports the idea of low investment, low unit count, just a ball of infantry and artillery, and just defend the frontier. Keep things close to the base range so you can always respond if they attack you. Use indirects because they draw the attacker further in, right? When you're on a 1-base and you have an artillery sitting 4 tiles from your base, you can do so much, even if they hit the artillery. You could buy a war tank and it's in range of the artillery. So I like to use artillery to change where they want to fight. Artillery either deter attacks, or if they can hit the artillery, they draw them in. So that's kind of my idea, and that's why 1-base artillery, maybe they get a bad rap. Obviously, you need sufficient defenders for an artillery. You can't make an artillery work in wide open plains with no infantry around. But once you have sufficient defenders, which 1-bases can get, especially if you're careful about warding off attacks earlier, the artillery aren't so bad. They still do their job. They draw the opponent in, and they probably trade pretty efficiently. They probably at least hit 1 tank if the opponent's still trying to make an attack happen. So keep that in mind. 1-base artillery aren't like a death sentence. They just need to hit that sweet spot where they have enough units around to support them. So I move my CO tank down, and this is kind of an interesting position from me. It looks a little rickety, so on its face value, he can actually, we have to think about CO zones. He can hit from here, and this causes his CO zone to be like this, because his CO unit's sitting here. Okay, and remember the CO zone gives a little attack buff. So the reason I'm showing this is because then he could go here. And with the attack buff, he could hit my CO unit. And I think I can even show you in Tiny Wars, if I click the unit, on their turn. So he would get like a 9-3, pretty darn good. And then within the CO zone, I can't show that because I can't actually move the units, but I can tell you that it'd be like a 7-5. So he would cripple both of these tanks, including my CO tank. The reason, and I obviously charted all this out, the reason I don't think it's good for him is this tank's in base range, and he has to soften it up with his CO tank, and I would be able to revenge kill his CO tank with the base tank plus the injured tank and maybe even my CO tank. And at that point, he's kind of just traded one base into two base almost evenly, and it's not really so great for him. So this may look, you know, a lot of people, especially newer players, they think that allowing any first strikes on any of their tanks by any opposing tanks could be bad. So they try to avoid, you know, they might be more conciliatory. They move back further, and they end up conceding position. And as I described earlier, you don't want to give up your claim to the middle of the map just for free. And so what you do when you're planning a turn, what I do anyway, you check how much you can get away with without losing. So I just explained why that attack from them isn't so great. It's a lot of things in a row. You have to check all these attacks and counterattacks. For me, I love the move planner, and it can be just 20 minutes to several hours depending on the turn, checking all these lines, making sure I'm good even if they do X or Y, and making sure I'm as far forward as possible. So the idea there is now I have a more firm claim on the center, and I might even be warding them away from the center. So all this matters. It's just a tank sitting on a tile, but it really has ripple effects. So it's important to try to maximize how far forward you can be without creating weakness. Now, speaking of weakness, there was an attack from my opponent on this turn that created a unique kind of weakness. So I didn't really see this coming. I'm kind of coming back to Tiny Wars after a year or so of not playing, and I kind of forgot about this attack that they're going to do. So they put their CO here, and they just shoot with one tank. And the idea here from my opponent is this is out of range of my tank. So their CO tank is perfectly safe. There's nothing that can hit it. And sure, this tank's probably going to get slapped because he doesn't really have good reinforcements. He bought a mech which is pretty slow to support the idea of early interaction. So that's kind of some dissonance on his part strategically from his unit buys. But he does cripple my CO unit, which we're going to find out later in this game just how much of a liability a weakened CO unit is. So I didn't really think about that, and I do think this is kind of, maybe you could view it as like maybe sacking a pawn in chess. It kind of feels like that. He's going to get counterattacked on this tank, but he will have succeeded in crippling the CO unit, and this is going to come up later as a liability. So let's just keep going. It's an interesting attack. Over here he does go for the interrupt like I mentioned earlier. And I didn't really see this coming. It does pair nicely with the idea of hitting my CO tank, because if he didn't hit my CO tank, then it can wheel down here and make me strong over here. But since he hit my CO tank, I'm kind of more liable to recoil back into the fold of this kind of strong tank blob. So that kind of is a good attack for my opponent. And yes, I have the recon, and yes, he doesn't really have anything to punish it, but he is trading two base into one base and kind of asserting control over this region. And I think creating problems for your opponent, creating unanswered issues like a neutral cap instead of a finished cap, makes sense even if you go a little negative. Now I have this problem I have to solve for many turns. I'm not capturing this property for a while, especially if he keeps sacking stuff, which he's got all the ammunition to do. And he can eventually create kind of a coalition around this, and it's a place where I'm weak. This is kind of more on his two-base side, and so he can point his army toward this weak spot, right? always look for weak places to exploit your positional advantage. So I think that's a decent attack for my opponent. All right. So I find a counterattack. He cannot answer this, and I'll explain why in a second. It isn't a non-trivial counterattack. There are ways this trades more even, but I think there's no answer for him in this particular formation. So I make sure this infantry is here to counterattack him if he attacks from the forest, because otherwise that trade's positive for him. In Days of Ruin, forests are 3 stars and cities are 2 stars, so on its face that's a positive trade. You have to make sure you have a little extra to make that bad for him. And I have this annoying little artillery formation. So this artillery was bought at the latest timing where this was still possible, which is one thing to always keep an eye out for. If you can still be annoying, deny a cap, but you don't need the artillery for a day or two, it would just be sitting there, then delay the artillery. You buy some more tanks first, get that going. You only need... Artillery are pretty passive. They're not going to really fire on anything unless the opponent starts wanting to sack things. So having them sitting around doesn't really generate you value if all they're supposed to be doing is denying a cap. It's only on the day that they would be capping that you want to put the artillery there. Or on a 2-base side, it's 1 day later, because you can interrupt and you don't care because it's 2-base side, and then put the artillery behind it, and they'll never finish that cap either. So that's just something to keep in mind. Oh yeah, let me explain to this attack. So my CO tank is hung, right? He can kill it if he wants. The issue for him is he has, because of this mech partially, and he bought another one, there is some dissonance from that mech on the idea of a big brawl over here with a lot of tanks streaming. And I wanted to punish that maximally, and I said, okay, we will spam tanks. I will spend all my money except for this little goofy artillery thing, flowing tanks toward the center, and I think I can win here because he kind of wasted money on these mechs, and I also just got this little advantage. And let's see what happens if he tries to attack into this. So this is a very specific formation. If he attacks here, he kills my CO unit undoubtedly, and I don't know if 2 of my tanks kill his CO tank necessarily, because I just have these 2 tanks nearby. Especially, I think he can use his 1 HP tank as a... No, I have infantry around, never mind. So I will get 2 shots with tanks, but I don't know if that's a guaranteed kill. CO tanks are very tanky. They have veteran stats, so they have... You can see he's on a road, but with veteran stats plus Isabella's buff, he's got 30% defense even on a road. So he's pretty hard to kill. So that was one problem I had when I was planning. The solution was to notice that this tank can be CO'd up immediately, so he would be killing my CO tank. This tank can have the CO placed on it. He can go sit on this tile, and he would provide a CO zone to the tile where my CO unit used to be, such that I could attack with CO boost onto his CO tank and then one unboosted tank. Or even I could use the boost over here, I think, depending on the movement and placement and all that. But with even 1 CO boost, it's enough to kill his CO tank. And then what have we got? I killed one of his tanks, and I killed his CO tank, and I'm just up a tank at that point. So that would look pretty good for me. So he can't really do that. And I really liked this when I planned this. None of this works if this tank used his full 6 movement. So this is 6 spaces right here. If this tank had, the one sitting on the port, if he had gone on this plains tile, there's a forest tile here, and if I CO'd up a tank and I had a tank sitting there, I would have to end up here, or move the tank first. Neither of them allow me to apply the CO buff to this tile. So I had to basically make sure that this tank wasn't getting in the way of a newly CO'd tank by using his same tile, so that he could move down after and use the CO buff. So kind of an interesting little interaction. I don't know how much something like that comes up in Advanced Wars by Web, but it is something to watch out for. Try not to steal tiles from your own units whenever possible. And in this case, it didn't really matter that this tank only moved 5. I would have liked for it to move 6, but he's still doing his job, so that was kind of a fun little interaction. Alright, so we've established he can't really hit this tank. He also can't really hit this tank because then I'll have CO boost and an injured CO unit and a fresh tank, and it'll be enough to kill his CO tank. So because of all this, he's basically made a gambit. He weakened my CO tank while keeping us healthy, but he did lose, I guess it's 4 tank HP here. So not really a bad trade for my opponent. So they decide to really hammer on this idea, which I do think it's good. Create this pressure on your 2-base side. Make sure they never get this cap. So I think that's a pretty cool idea. And they are getting charged with their CO zone. And this is a great example of where a weakened CO unit kind of punishes me. So also note they bought a B-copter, that'll come up later. So I had a few options here, and all of them are kind of held back by the CO unit. So let me go into the simulation here, and I'll show you the alternate attacking options I had. So the first option is to ignore his pressure down here. Let him have it and try to apply equal and opposite pressure up here. And in that sense, I am kind of looking the same as him. There's no disadvantage necessarily. There were some problems with this though. So let's start with the good. This is a hole for my opponent, and a hole is just a place where your opponent really can't attack a unit and it's still pretty far forward. So it's able to exert pressure and be immune to pressure. So, and the reason this is a hole in this formation is that was a roll, but I could have used the bike to kill, so this was all perfectly acceptable. I can take out this tank, which is the only one that can really attack my CO tank. This other tank just physically can't reach, and this tank can only reach from the left. And it's trivial for me to defend the left tile. So with the use of this hole, I can exploit kind of a hole in their defense, kill an infantry here, make sure this cap is forever denied, just like they're trying to do over here on my side, and get some CO zone charge. Now the downside of this formation, let me just finish moving, get some more charge, right? I have a lot of charge, that much is for sure. I have a lot of tanks. But he still has the healthy CO tank. So let me just end turn. I'm not going to move everything. Let's just assume I kind of balled up over here, which is another issue with this formation. I kind of have to ball up because I don't have any tanks over here anymore. But let's just assume I balled up sufficiently enough that he wants to pivot up here. So he gets to use the mech, which is one downside. And I don't know, I'm just gonna make that attack juicier for him or something. He still gets plenty of charge. And he has a very defensible formation. And I haven't accomplished too much, because all my attack did, I killed an infantry, and I just hit a tank. And now he's killed off my tank. He's killed off the bike, because I kind of yeeted it. He's injured my units, he's made a nice defensive wall, and at the end of the day, he still has the high HP CO tank, and I have the low HP CO tank, and I have to kind of babysit this unit. It's vulnerable. I either have to join with it, which goes down in effective tank count, or I need to retreat. And either way, I'm kind of trading negative, because I'm ending the trade without getting anything in return. So that formation doesn't look great. There was one variant of this formation where I basically just yeet less. So It's very similar. I still do this, but I go up here and I go over here, and I just kind of tuck my tanks behind this wall. And this formation's fine, but it still has the same general issues that the other one does. He hasn't lost much, right? He only lost 1 infantry in this case. He can just re-injure my CO tank after the joint, and he still gets to use his CO tank as a bully. He can do that actually even better. He gets a better trade if he uses a CO unit like this. And he just basically gets a better attack than the attack I did. I know it's on his 1-base side, so it might look good long term for me, but because he has the healthy CO tank and I don't, it's really hard for me to like get more CO charge and effectively counterattack him. And this terrain is just kind of naturally defensive for my opponent. There's this mountain and no effective attacker to kill this tile, especially because he's gonna put stuff on this side of it, means that I would have trouble dislodging his formation as he counterattacks. And so that really didn't look that good. So now when I was checking this, I was feeling kind of bad. I was thinking, shoot, he's just done this, and I can't even do this in counter. Because he has more mid presence, he has the ability to pivot up and punish me when I try to do that in counter. And I don't have that. And why don't I have that mid presence? Because if we go back, I have the injured CO tank. I can't... Look, I'm in range of his CO tank, and this is a terrible shot for me, right? So that's why I called it kind of a gambit for my opponent. He's created a weakness in my army. I can't go anywhere my commander goes. I need to babysit the commander. So here's the other attack I was looking at. So that was all option A. So option B, I do something a little passive. I just sit here. It doesn't seem passive, but I'm about to wall up around it, right? And I think I did some sacks to break this tile. Yeah, it was something like this. And recon here. And I make like this impenetrable wall. And I cap here. And I'm using, no, I think I did this wrong. Okay, well, maybe the bike and this tank swap or something like that, but it's something like this. Yeah, the bike needs to swap because otherwise he can kill this tile. Let me check my screenshot 1 second. Okay. I checked my screenshot, and actually I was checking an option like this, but I think it's too easy for him. Even with a tank here, he can peel this tank and then kill my CO unit. So I reasoned that it's not really feasible to just put my CO tank somewhere like here. What I did end up doing, we go back a few moves. I moved my CO tank here, and notice that my tank didn't really do too much, so I could just join, and then it's totally unimpeachable. It's hard for him to do anything about that. And this bike can do the job that the tank was doing. And the whole reason for all those sacks, it's a little not obvious, but it's just to free up this recon and get this cap. So I'm only using 1 tile to attack his bike, or it was this tile, so that the recon is free to hit up here. Because the recon doesn't have much else to do, these tanks are blocking his infantry, which is pretty smart from him. So the idea is just to get this hit with the recon. That's the reason for all those shenanigans. The sacks do have a cost though. It would be nice to have some kind of chaff units around for the artillery, but this just looked good to me. Like the artillery guards this kind of weak spot here, and also if he does use this weak spot tile, he has to choose between hitting the bike or hitting the capturing infantry. So all of that looked good to me. And then you finish off this formation just by, you would definitely always interrupt this cap because it's just annoying for the opponent. But you just make this vertical line, and he can only shoot from 1 tile on the CO tank. The reason I didn't like this is he still has that 1 tile, and he gets to kind of just punch my CO tank, maybe hit another tank somewhere, get some more charge, and kind of slam into things. And though I made the best effort to kind of defend everything, It's not looking amazing for me. Especially this isn't very optimized, but he could probably do some more optimized things here. And I still kind of have to retreat because he would have the healthy CO tank and I would have the unhealthy CO tank. And you can see how much of a liability this has been time and time again. It was really a thorn in my side when I was planning the turn. So now finally I will go back into the game and show you what I actually did, which was kind of the third option. I think it was the best option, but I may not have done it as best as possible, so we'll see what that looks like. Right, so the option back in the real game here, this is what I did. I moved my CO tank actually down one more than what I just showed you. And I do some shuffling. I have to give up this cap, which I really debated, but at the end of the day, I wanted this formation more than I cared about a single cap, so it's fine. I make this kind of vertical line here, like this, with this recon at the tip. And the idea here, once I finish moving everything, the main idea, I injure his CO tank, just like he did to mine. And in so doing, hopefully, I force him to be as passive as I am. That is the main idea. I think it's a good idea. I think it's good to try to make sure their CO tank is kind of only as powerful as yours, or any CO unit, so that they can't be more aggressive than you. They have to be equally aggressive, pull back a little, whatever. So that's the idea here. And I still go for this interrupt over here because this is, while I didn't put the full brunt of my army behind it, I can still be really annoying, just sack stuff into this, still create this kind of point where I can then create more problems later, keep sacking dudes into it. And he's not super strong against infantry over here. He just has this one tank which really wants to go to the center, and these mechs really don't want to fight infantry. So for me, I see that and I think, okay, I just need to put my dudes in range of making sure this is never finished, and I'll just sack all my dudes into it if I can. And the reason to put this guy here, it seems like it's crazy because like this guy can go on the mountain and hit him pretty well. But I was like, well, I have two guys around, and this is your one base. I want to cap this eventually, because it's going to be really annoying for you if I go for this capture. So what's the fastest way to do all that? It's to start a fight and then cleanly finish him off with a 10 HP infantry up here. So he would shoot this guy, and maybe I would use a tank or something, or I would sack this guy, the weakened guy, and then I would get a clean shot with this guy. And now I have a full HP infantry sitting around here, ready to capture this. So I went a little negative just to try to get better parity on the trades, where he does more damage, but I have a full HP guy left over, something like that. So that's kind of the idea here. So what I missed in all this, and a bit of a soapbox maybe about the damage calculator in Tiny Wars, I missed, well, let me just explain the foundation, the bedrock of this formation mentally for me. I have this vertical line. He can't like one-shot this tank. It doesn't do enough damage with his CO tank. He has to pull away his CO tank to use the other tank, so that doesn't work. He only has these two tanks in the vicinity, that's the other thing, that can really do anything. So my thought process was like, okay, sure, he can kill the recon. He can go like this, and then just some infantry are enough to finish it off because recons take a lot of damage from tanks. But he only has his 5 HP tank left, and his 5 HP tank is not enough to kill my 4 HP tank. I calculated all this, it'll be like a 3-2 or something, or 4-2. Totally fine. We're both just kind of spinning wheels at that point. What I didn't calculate, because I have trouble with the Tiny Wars damage calculator, is how much damage he can do just pecking away at my recon with some infantry and the 5 HP CO tank. So here's what the damage calculator looks like. It'll show you a range, and it'll show you the HP the unit ends up at, and all HP is perfectly deterministic, or not deterministic, it's random, but it shows you the outcome, the exact HP in Tiny Wars, which is kind of cool. So you can do a lot of good math figure a lot of things out just looking at that. What you can't really do very well is figure out multi-hit KO sequences. So I was making use of like a dice calculator website to, I think it's called Any Dice if you want to use it, and it gave me general ranges, but when you have defense and the damage formula scales weirdly with luck values, I couldn't get precise numbers out of it, and this kind of, I guess, demoralized me from calculating as deeply as I would in Advanced Wars by Web. And one thing I missed, because I was kind of not calculating as much, is just how much damage these sacks do. So because I hit his infantry here, my recon took a little more chip damage. The sack did a lot of damage. He's able to use the 5 HP tank and just some infantry. And this bike, which I was really surprised that bikes do that much damage, to pick off the recon. And this was outside my calculations. This was a blunder by me. All that sequence you just saw, he kills my CO tank, that was all like 91% to happen. I let it be that high because I messed up. So I had easy ways to make it not be that high. The easiest way was simply not to attack with this bike. If I didn't attack this infantry, he can no longer sack an infantry, so he's lost some. Sackers are basically like extra tiles to attack from, because they go away when they die and the tile's free, right? So he would have had less infantry to attack with, and less luck damage on my recon. And I think what was a 91% chance for the recon to die, if I didn't attack, would have went to like 10%. Would have been a much better attack. I don't even know about the 10%. I think there were ways to make a better formation that didn't allow any luck. But not allowing a 91%, making an 80% improvement in your chances of losing your CO unit sounds like a pretty good deal to me. So anyway, that was definitely a misplay by me, and it's a real punishment. Like I said, Isabella's superpower is great. My opponent's now at, where does it show the charge? 31, and soon to be more. I think he's going to hit some more things. Let's see here. Yeah, he hits this infantry in the zone. He hits this infantry in the zone. Now he's at 45. And the CO power is at 60. So, and you can get your CO power and use it in the same turn in this game. So if I keep more than 15 damage worth of units within his CO zone, because it's a CO meter builds based on HP damage dealt to units within the zone. If I do that, he can pop his power next turn. And like I said earlier, Isabella's power, Adder's superpower on crack, it's like Von Bolt plus Adder. It's really good. So, and I have no CO meter. My meter's just been drained. It's like they use Sasha's CO power. So this is terrible for me. It's really bad. Definitely a blunder on my part. And you can see it in the map dynamics. So he has now asserted 2 base control, actually a coalition force, in the center. And this means if I just retreat, it's not good for me. He can close off the center. He can keep this cap neutral forever. He even has pressure on this cap. I would have a force of tanks and artillery just sitting on their hands, chilling out over here because they cannot press into this. Disconnected from this force of tanks sitting on their hands because they cannot join up with the other tank force. And my last line of defense is this band. So I need to ensure that this vertical line stays defended. If it does, I still have the ability to transfer units through mid. I still have the ability to connect my tanks. So I need to ensure, no matter what I do, that this line holds. So it's so weird in Advanced Wars. I don't know exactly how things end up being so important, like this mountain range and all that. It's just how it goes in competitive when there's only tiny edges to be gained because everyone's pretty good at the game. It really does matter where you choose to fight, the terrain. Small terrain differences can make huge changes in how you should play. So, and in this case, this jagged mountain range on both sides means that the middle control is super important. So I need to ensure that I contest that, because if I retreat and he has a CO power up and he can just ball up forces and hold middle, and he has CO power, and it would be foolhardy to attack into that. He can ball up till we have 50 units, and then it's unstoppable. He has a game-winning CO power at that point. So even though it looks terrible for me, when I saw this, I thought, I must contest. I have to contest this formation somehow, and there's two ways to do it. One is I find a way to kill his CO unit, which doesn't look good given the board here. And two is I make sure to get as many value trades as possible, because he was down a tank in all this. And I make sure that my minor tank advantage makes his CO power not good enough, where I take the full brunt of his CO power. I basically force him to use it by being really aggressive. And he uses it, and it's over, and I've withstood the storm. And maybe I'm a little worse off, but I'm able to keep playing. So that was what was running through my head. Okay. Now it's my turn. There we go. So one thing, a song unsung for this Beecopter. I did not buy an anti-air or a duster on my turn. I bought triple tank instead. And the reason for it is I think that Beecopter placement on that airport is susceptible to your opponent ignoring it. So I was able to fight. He's already moved it once, right? This is 6 squares off the airport. I was able to fight on a tile more than 13 squares away from the airport. So 6, 12 is the movement, then one more for his reach. And because I was able to do that, I didn't need to buy an anti-air yesterday. I could have, and it would have reached here and it would have been fine. But I could buy a duster or an anti-air tomorrow, and so long as I hold this line, that's another reason you want to hold the line. So long as I hold it, my anti-air can go up here somewhere and cover everything. So just to explain the timing to you, so it's my turn now, right? So I would buy anti-air. He would move Beecopter somewhere very close indeed to my forces. And I would move anti-air somewhere like here. Actually on the city. So I'd move it somewhere like here. And his Beecopter somewhere like here. And the anti-air still has the ability to cover most everything around here, right? So because he bought that Beecopter from a more far back airport, and I was able to fight more than 2 days outside of its range, I could delay my anti-air and still cover everything. But I can actually do one better. My preferred counter to Beecopters in Tiny Wars is the good old Duster. So we'll see when I buy the Duster just how much it covers and how much this Beecopter is forced to concede because of it. So we'll get to that. So okay. My opponent, he had a formation that killed my CO tank and caused there to be 0 luck to kill his on the counter hit, right? So 0 luck. There was a way, once I show you how I try to do the wall break, I'll explain the way that he could have formed where it wasn't possible. But here's what I found. So there was luck in a lot of these moves. So first off, I think this was luck based already. I can just... Yeah, there was a chance he did not do enough damage to kill this infantry on the sack, but I needed this sack. I needed to hit this guy down to 6 or so, because I'm trying to wall break through this path. So with that sack, it was enough to kill that 6 HP infantry. Without it, it wouldn't have done it. So I think that was a guaranteed kill. So far, it was like a maybe 20% chance of failure so far. Okay, let's check this attack. This is like another 20% chance of failure. And when you have these conditional probabilities, you have to multiply them together. So it's like 0.8 times 0.8 is the total chance of this succeeding. So it's getting lower already. And then I sack an infantry into his CO unit. And the reason I do that is he is so defensive. I want to shoot with his tank, right? But I can't kill that. That is only a 27% chance of killing. I need to sweeten the deal a little. So by doing the sack, it's just adding a tiny little bit of damage, but everything adds up. So let's see here. I do get the kill. Let me check the chance of killing before that attack. It's like another 20% chance of failure. So 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8. Let me check the math there. Yeah, it's like a 50% chance of this working. So you better believe I was sweating when I was inputting this, because I knew a lot of conditional probabilities adding up like that. Each one of them high, like 80%, but you add up enough of those and it gets down real low real quick. So I was very afraid, and I was really fortunate and not skilled to get this counterattack. So I got a bit lucky. My opponent did allow this wall break, so the way to prevent the wall break, all he had to do was attack with this bike first and then this infantry, then he would be full HP. I could still do the sack, but it wouldn't be enough to kill with this tank, because this tank, actually, I think even that tank was a roll. So it might even be lower than 50%. Okay, well, it was only a 9% roll, so maybe call it like 45% to do the whole operation that I did. But without allowing that, you saw how tanky that infantry was. With just that tiny bit extra HP, it would not be possible to break through here. It's not possible to go through above here because I don't have sufficient attackers to kill this tank, and then I still would need, I had to sack a 4 HP infantry for this to be good. Otherwise it was only a 27% chance. So I really needed everything. I needed not only to wall break him, but to have a weakened infantry in the line of fire of this to sweeten the deal. So my opponent, I misplayed obviously. I allowed a 91% wall break. My opponent misplayed as well. He allowed maybe a 45% wall break. So c'est la vie. No game of Advanced Wars is perfect. We all make lots of mistakes. These happen to be two pretty large mistakes in short order. But now, after all that, whether it be luck or skill, I'm feeling like I'm doing pretty well now. Because I'm able to, what just happened here, I'm able to reassert kind of my own band of control. I definitely have this vertical line. That much is clear. And I'm now contesting my opponent's own vertical line. So it's going good for me. So let's skip ahead here. Oh yeah, and since things are going so well, I decided to be a little annoying here. So I assessed that I didn't really care about these tanks getting hit. Only this tank is really weak. The rest of the tanks are kind of... I just have a big ball of tanks, and this tank is the only one he can back up with a mech. He backs up with a mech and shoots on this little set of tiles here. So that's the only one I was worried about, and I think having an extra tank doesn't really help me punish him for that attack. I think I was very happy as a clam that I just killed his CO unit. I was fine if he just picked off this tank and I just retreated with the rest, and since he only had 2 attacking tanks anyway, it's not like he was going to be hitting more, right? He already has a juicy tank to kill here. He only has 2 healthy tanks to attack with, so there's not really fear of more attacks. He's just got this many attackers. So why put this tank in the ball over here if it's just going to chill out and watch? Because it doesn't need to help counterattack anything. I have plenty of tanks to do that. Might as well get some value, however minor. So I just shot this infantry here. And this was a roll, I think a 50% roll to lower it to 2 HP or 3 HP. If I lowered it to 3, I was going to pick it off with this guy. And if I lowered it to 2, I'll just cap. And the reason I cap is it is no longer guaranteed that he interrupts this to 9. I think he's got a 50% roll of interrupting this to 9. And if he doesn't interrupt it to 9 with the 2 HP infantry, he has to use a whole tank. And that's about to be very bad for him because I have a CO tank directly seeing the whole engagement. And this is his weak side, and it's not looking too hot right now. So this is one example of ways you can press a minor advantage. you want to create multi-pronged threats around the map in places your opponent has trouble responding. So this is their one base side. I want to make sure I'm doing things, making them respond on their one base side, because it creates immediate activity for these tanks. It basically turns them on a day sooner because they are now seeing a one base fight where they're close. And it also creates a long-term winning proposition for me. They can trade kind of evenly on tanks, but eventually I'm going to spam so many tanks that I'll just overwhelm them over here on their one base. So this is just general map dynamic stuff, but it's important to try to really create as many threats as possible. A lot of players would see that things are kind of being brawly in middle and want to ensure that they have everything needed to close out that fight. Perfectly sane logic, but once you observe that you don't really need more tanks than you currently have, and you want to create multi-pronged threats which will create issues for the opponent many days in advance, once you've ascertained all that, you should definitely start creating those threats. Basically, it's just a waiting game. It's like, okay, have I made sure I fought for mid effectively, and I'm not going to lose mid? Once you've done that, that's like the primary objective. You can start working on these secondary objectives where you try to split their army and be annoying and slowly get advantage that way. So, all right, tank spam continues. So I definitely didn't want to lose my control of this band, so I want to assert it as strong as possible. I also bought a mech. The idea with the mech, so I don't know the idea with his mechs. I think they are kind of dissonant with like this big battle we got into, like I said before. They're just kind of slow to doing anything. This one mech is finally doing something. He'll be able to support from this tile on attacking this tank. But that's super delayed, and I've kind of already won this battle over here, albeit from some luck. But I feel like the mechs, unfortunately, I know that they're the best they've ever been in Days of Ruin, but I feel like they're still not quite good enough. The 2 movement makes them so slow to get anywhere, which creates gaps, which allows the opponent to punish with tank spam. And they need a clear objective that they can get to in time and support a certain timing and things like that. And people really love the mech spam, especially in Tiny Wars. I just think this is a clear gap. These mechs aren't supporting. A tank might have supported and been a lot more of a thorn in my side. And these mechs are just kind of chilling. So, but I bought my own mech because it does support an idea. The idea is, let's defend this. I'm going to get this cap. I pushed him back over there. I have all the caps I need on my side. And if he decides to ball up and kind of push down here, let's just create an annoying defense with mechs and artillery and just a ball of infantry. So that was the idea there. Now, it's not like the mech's amazing, but I needed to budget this duster. So that was the other reason for the mech. And I did have to base skip. Not that I'm a fan of this, but and my opponent actually base skipped twice early in the game. So that was one reason I felt like I was justified, because I wasn't going to get overwhelmed for sure. But I just wanted to afford this extra tank, and once you view the tank and the duster as granted, I only had 2,500 plus this little 200 left to buy anything, so I couldn't buy infantry. So this base skip is more like squeezing out a tank than anything. Alright, so let's keep going. So unsurprisingly, my opponent is going to retreat a little. He really wants this cap. He joins. The cap's at 1. I think this is not correct, and the reason is I can definitely interrupt this. This is my strong side. I have lots of tanks and plentiful units to interrupt with. So I don't quite agree with that. I also don't know if I agree with attacking from here instead of here, but he does want to stay out of range of my CO tanks, so I do get that. But this just feels a little vulnerable. I don't know, maybe I would have just attacked once. It's hard to say. This is the control I was talking about in action. It's like, yes, he can use these tiles and challenge my control, but there's so much threat of attacks here, and he's kind of light on tanks to try to usurp my position by attacking. So this is kind of the map dynamic playing out. So we'll see what I do on my turn. So he buys an anti-air for the Duster. He needs something. I like Dusters in Tiny Wars, and because I like them, I'm not a huge fan of B-Copters, and that's why I haven't bought any up till now. B-Copters, okay, so they hit a tank, right? So they do like 6 HP to a tank maybe. Then they get hit by a Duster, and the Duster nearly kills it. I think it does 7 or 8. And then the anti-air, assuming they have it in range, finally punishes the Duster, but it doesn't kill the Duster. It also does like 7 or 8. And what you're left with, the B-Copter player has just spent 9k on a unit that's going to get gunned down by tanks and infantry, because a 3 HP, 2 HP B-Copter takes like 14 or something from a tank. It'll die in 1 or 2 hits. And I've spent 13k on a unit that doesn't get gunned down by anything but an anti-air. So I also got to spam tanks. He had to buy an anti-air. I got to use all my bases to buy tanks, although Dusters are expensive, so that's the one downside. I had to skip a tank here. But I do like having that leftover flying unit. So it's basically invincible to everything but that anti-air. I like forcing that anti-air out of him. They're very weak to tanks in this game, weaker than normal. And I like the fact that his B-Copter is going to go down easy. So for all these reasons, it's a lot of like micro advantages. It's not like super unbalanced. But for all these reasons, I really hate to see a Duster for my opponent when I buy B-Copters. Don't ever buy 2 B-Copters, because then a single Duster does so well into it. And anti-air have trouble chasing Dusters. They're slow. Dusters move 8 in the air. So there's a lot of reasons to like the Duster, even though their damage matrix seems abysmal otherwise. They also hold off bombers, so I think things just add up a lot where Dusters are slightly... The Duster player has a slight edge over the B-Copter player. So that's my screed on Dusters and B-Copters. Alright, so on my turn, so he gives me this flip cap. He had insufficient units to really contest it. And now I get to kind of be a bully with my CO unit. So he allowed me to hit this mech, and I will take that for what it's worth. Because with that mech disarmed, and I definitely don't want to give him this cap, I'm able to kind of strike at his tanks here in the center with impunity, and I'm able to put chaff in the way of my value targets, so he has trouble picking off these tanks in order to get to my healthier tanks. So I'm kind of just overwhelming him over here. The mech's diffused, these tanks are struck, the artillery is able to slink its way around here and defend the most vulnerable tanks, and it's all in my CO zone. So I've basically chopped him out of mid here. And I don't know if this was really avoidable for my opponent. This might just be how the map plays. Once you get a micro advantage in mid, it's really hard for your opponent to claw back. So this is how the map plays. And I don't want to allow his B-Copter to hit my artillery. One way artillery formations crumble is they hit the tanks and they hit the artillery behind it. So I want to make sure there's no wrap around there. And I have this really nice central formation. So due to some luck earlier, I've now asserted firm control over the middle. So let's see what my opponent does. He gets some charge, which is good. But he has to make some concessions. He's been beat up pretty bad here. And this is pretty rough for my opponent. He has to pull back, and I'm up 120,000 to 97,000, so I'm going to be up at least a half turn, maybe more, of army value. I also have a minor charge lead, which I'm going to try to push more. So the idea with this formation and the problem for my opponent, the reason he couldn't do much better, he is pretty vulnerable over here because he pivoted his CO tank away, but he absolutely must get something going over here. So he has to choose one side or the other to make strong. And he kind of chose this side, right? This is actually pretty strong for my opponent still. He had to pivot all his units down here, and this makes this side naturally weak. I have the fulcrum here. I'm able to go here or here, and he must be prepared to answer either. And he can only attack me from one set of angles, and I can kind of wall off the other because I have all this chaff around. And I have these 4 nice little tiles here in the center. It's easy to make walls. So this is kind of the win condition of the map. And I'm going to press my advantage. So I'm just getting some hits here with... I'm trying to get charge, basically. I'm farming for charge. And the other reason for this attack is I'm going to put this tank here. I'm able to flip a cap. And there's not really anything he can do about that. He has nothing in range, and I have chaff in the way. So this is one reason to keep injured, weak units around and not sack them, though obviously sacks paid off big time earlier in the game. But if you can get away with not sacking, you can waste the whole turn of healthy tanks and healthy units picking them off. So he cannot interrupt this cap, and I get a whole flip cap on the back of some weak units. This is also a decent attack from me, and one thing you notice I did, I used a lot of level 1 tanks to kill off units, which gives me a lot of level 2 tanks. So level 1 is 5% attack, level 2 is 10% attack. These aren't huge differences, but if they get level 3 veteran, they get 20% attack, I think, and 20% defense, which is insane. The CO unit is a veteran, that's why it's so resilient. And so whenever you can create opportunities for level 1 units to get to 2 and 2 to veteran, you should. So the idea with this attacking formation was to create a lot of level 2s that are ready to veteran up and put some not so great units to hit in front of him. He can hit these 2 tanks, but I'll get this cap and I can just pull back. So this is what I like to call pull-in tactics. The idea is, yeah, I might go negative on this exchange. I did kill off a tank, but he might kill off or weaken 2 tanks. But I am able to get a flip cap he can't do anything about, and I might just ghost him next turn, just pull back, retake the center, and I have this flip cap. He's been buying tanks because he's desperately underpowered over here. It's going to take him forever to get this flip cap flipped back, even though it's right on the doorstep of his base. So this is one thing Poland likes to do. Yes, you go negative. You're trading tanks down. They're getting better kills, things like that. That might all be true. But if you get the caps in the meantime and they don't have flip caps ready, you're just going to be generating so much incremental income. You can see I'm already up income over time that it actually works out. You're going to be getting extra tanks over time that replace the tanks you lost, and you can continue sacking stuff to ensure that they never flip that back. And the outcome is not that they eventually win and eventually get the flip cap. The outcome, if you're crushing enough, is that they will lose. They'll get drained of economy, you'll keep trading tanks roughly even, and you'll eventually have a bigger army. So that's a legitimate strategy to keep your eyes peeled for. And that's kind of what I was thinking when I was deliberating this attack. And I think it's a good attack. It's not even a terrible attack on its own merits, especially with this artillery covering one tile. But it's a good attack even on, I'm going to sack stuff and get this flip cap merits. So something to keep an eye out for. And you can see how trivial it is to cut him out of access to middle. I just have this wall of infantry and an artillery. The whole thing's super defended. The moment he attacks that, I get to pivot everything and hit him back really hard. So, alright, I bought another just-in-time artillery down here. This guy was just in time to move onto this port. Very passive, but all he needs to do is deny the city so that my opponent can't get anything started over here. he's got this bike that's looking over here, this infantry that's looking over here, this tank which could go over here. He was definitely, he at least had hopes of a flip cap. But with a single 6k unit, the artillery, and the lander if I need as a perfect wall, I can completely shut off the idea of this flip cap. It's just not going to happen. And the mech, it's really not doing much, honestly. I probably could have just bought an infantry. But the mech supports the idea of long-term defense if he decides to kind of try to break this lander artillery formation. So this is a perfect minimal formation. I only needed this many units. I pivoted everything else up to the middle, and this minimal formation can make sure he doesn't get any caps around here for a long time. So this makes this strong by kind of negative space. I have nothing over here. That means everything must be over here. It's like kind of like fog of war logic. Like you don't see anything in one place, watch out for the other place. I must be strong over here because there's very little over here. I've also started streaming these B-copters. I don't know. It's really awkward for him to use the anti-air around this mountain range when I have this control. So he has to choose a side and I can send the B-copters to the other side, and it's just terrible for him. And it's also awkward for him if he wants to buy the true counter, a duster. I already have a duster looking at his base, and I might just sack the duster to just trade into his duster just to slow him down. And he has lower money, and buying dusters, $13,000 unit, is really painful on 23k income when you want to buy tank. So for all those reasons, B-copter spam is totally good. And I should have deleted this gunboat here and sent the copter fully to the right, this one. But I figured it's fine to send it up one square. It's just better. I'm not going to get HQ captured at this point in the game. And it's just better to leave your options open. So this B-copter is a little more non-committal from this tile. And if you can be more non-committal, might as well. So that was kind of an oversight by me. So predictably, he's kind of trying to make me suffer for that attack. And he even gets to make this little vertical wall here. And this makes a decent amount of sense. It's hard to dislodge this tank because the mountain tile, the B-copter's out of range. And he's got to do something to reassert control of the middle. So it's desperation a little. Anti-air covers most things. But this is kind of his last stand. So for me, though, I have a lot of options. So I have 41 energy, and I am able to get super CO power this turn. I could do some attacks and then use the CO tank to activate it, and it wouldn't do that much because I'd have to use a lot of tanks to get the CO power, but it's an option. And I have the option of attacking, again, either of two ways. I could go up here. I even have like ways to like hit his base, which is a little scary for him, or I could go down here. I wasn't sure for a while. I was debating. There's a lot of options. None of them looked amazing. This is a decently defensive formation for my opponent, so it's hard to dig too deep in here. But eventually I found what I think is the best attack, so no mercy for my opponent here. I make use of the sack idea. I sack that level 2 tank, and then get some charge, use my CO tank, the only unit strong enough to kill that 8 HP tank like that. This was a roll though, I think it's a 50% roll or so, but I could use this infantry, put him on the mountain, and almost guaranteed kill that guy, so it wasn't a very concerning roll. And then I do another roll, so this 1 HP infantry sacks into this infantry on the road, and this tank in the CO zone is, I think he was like 90% or so to get that kill, but it's not the end of the world if I don't get that roll. It just means I can't hit the mech. So it's because the risk was low and the reward was high, this was a pretty no-brainer attack. And it really wall breaks him here, so this artillery is looking pretty bad. My CO tank is pretty safe. It's behind a wall of tanks that are hard to break. And I'm just kind of overwhelming him here. And now I have my Super CO power for next turn, so this I think was definitely the best attack. I do end up deleting the gunboat here just for more coverage. And it's looking pretty GG, so we'll just skim ahead here. I'm flipping another capture. I got the artillery guarding his ability to wrap around. So yeah. And they do resign. So, quick recap. As you can see, the map was really all about control of the center. And it all started early, back with our early tank chains, which is why those early tank chains matter so much. So let's go back. He has the first tank. I had the first vehicle, the first recon, right? He didn't end up using it. I would say optimally this movement's a bit questionable, and then on the next turn he could have sent it more central, but it's okay because in the end, as we know, he ends up using it for this gambit, which I don't disagree with, this kind of gambit, and he parlays that gambit into negative tank HP, but kind of this mid-pressure. So you can see he dallied around here for a while, but in the end he has a strong formation. So pretty decent from my opponent. He had issues in the opener where he kind of fell into this lock and didn't really mirror it over here, nor should he have. Once I had this cap, he just had to fall back. But he had a good idea over here in the center of permanently denying this cap. Now, it really came down to, I would just say, luck from me. I think I had a better position if I didn't allow this luck roll. And I think I probably could have just piloted the game to a win from this better position if I didn't allow the roll. But it really went downhill for me. And if there was like an eval bar, like a chess eval bar in the game, it would be like 80% blue to win at this position. And after his turn, it's like 60-70% blue to win because he allowed that wall break. So there was luck on both sides involved for sure, but a lot more luck needed for me, which is a sign that my opponent played well if I needed luck to kind of pilot the game back in my direction. So I was not too happy with how I performed in this game. I converted a lot of things well. I thought my opener was better, but at the end of the day, I made a mistake. My opponent punished it, and it was only through the graces of some decent luck and a mistake from my opponent that I came back in the game. So, pretty interesting game. This was obviously the big swing, and he had a big swing the turn before, and everything else after that was just kind of me having a better tank count and better position toward the middle, and just a little bit more money owing to this artillery lock. And I do think the artillery was better placed and better utilized by me than his artillery, which was very delayed, obviously. The reason for the artillery, it had a lot of nasty formations if we just skip forward. So it didn't do much for a few days because this center position was being attacked. But eventually it really starts doing its job here. This is an amazing artillery position. And it continues to do its job here, another good one. Oops, and it even does its turn on the last few turns. So that all makes it, I think, a worthwhile artillery. I don't even know if it ever fired on anything, but it didn't need to. It can create threats and defend in places that a tank could never dream of, over a mountain, things like that. So it's important to have a variety in your army. As much as the game is tank spam, you also need to make sure you have a Swiss Army knife. So you need B-copters, even though I rag on them because of Duster's existence. You need B-copters to use mountains for attacking. You need artillery to deter attacks in places that they would otherwise be able to attack. Wall break single tiles. Make sure that they can't build walls. And obviously you need infantry bikes and that sort of thing just to pick off their infantry and generate captures. So an unbalanced army can be exploited because without artillery, you can make very far forward wall positions that tanks can't break and things like that. So it's important to have diversification. Now, a brief tank argument why you spam tanks still, and why most of your army should be tanks. Tanks are the ultimate kill anything unit. They kill anything that's below like $12,000, or at least for land units. They even do decent chip damage to B-copters, like I was saying earlier. Tanks are used to open up positions for the rest of your army. Tanks can clear a tile for a cap. They can form walls because they're pretty hard to kill from anything but another tank. And just in general, they're your perfect anti-infantry unit, anti-bike unit, anti-artillery unit, anti-mech unit. They do good on first strike. So, and obviously they're the best anti-tank unit. So for all those reasons, you need a lot of tanks. You need to have not only a versatile army with some artillery, which again I think I made good use of one, but a lot of attackers. And tanks go the furthest, by the way. The infantry, sure, they can pick up infantry, but tanks can wrap around. They create the most tactics because they move 6. So that's why medium tanks and things like that are a little less justifiable. They have that debuff to their move, which really does matter, not only for how fast you get to a front, but also for tactics on that front. And also medium tanks just aren't amazing in Days of Ruin because mechs still do like 25 to them, weirdly. Artillery still chunk them down, and B-copters are still good against them. And they don't even really get that many one-shots, so they're not really adding that much to your attacking repertoire. So there's the Swiss Army knife analogy only goes so far. There's places where you just shouldn't be buying units because they're just not good. So anyway, those are kind of my thoughts on how to build an army, where to place it, and general strategy. So hope it was interesting to you. And if you're still here, thank you. And take it easy.